Hi, welcome to Listen to the Book Every Day, and this time you'll be reading the most popular leadership lesson from Harvard Business School. The Chinese version of the book is about 170,000 words, and I will spend about 21 minutes to tell you the essence of the book and see how to become a good leader. Before we start the book, let's talk about a movie called Soldier's Landing. The movie is set in a battle between the Soviet Red Army and the German Army in Stalingrad during World War II. The Soviet marshal was furious when the German army was losing ground and asked his officers how they could hold on. One officer suggested, strengthen discipline by killing all officers and soldiers who betray or flee. At this point, another officer said, give the soldiers hope, give them courage, inspire their love for their country, and make them believe that victory will come in the end. So we have to establish a hero to inspire them. If you were a marshal, whose advice would you take? If you look at the idea of ruling the army strictly, the first officer seems to be taking this idea to the extreme and may indeed be a good deterrent. But the second officer's advice seems to be good too, but can a heroic figure really make that much of a difference? In this story, which officer do you think would be considered a good leader? Don't be in a hurry to give the answer. To answer this question, you have to know what kind of leader is considered a good leader. What qualities and good behaviors do good leaders possess? After listening to this book, the most popular leadership lessons from Harvard Business School shared with you in this issue, I believe you will be able to make a better judgment. The author of this book is Robert Steve Kaplan, who used to be a vice president of Goldman Sachs, is now the vice chairman of Charity Ventures, the chairman of Google Investment Advisory Board, and he is also a professor of management practice class at Harvard Business School. Kaplan taught several leadership courses during his time at Harvard Business School, so he has many unique insights and perspectives on the subject of leadership. In the book, Kaplan provides an extremely valuable and practical leadership framework, which consists of 7 key issues, including vision and imperatives, time management, feedback, work delegation and succession planning, team pulse, team modeling, and self-potential, which you can use to think deeply about your own work. Okay, next I'll explain this leadership model for you in detail. Let's look at a few of the core questions to see how a good leader should lead his or her team to achieve goals. How do you win hearts and minds? And what are the special qualities needed to become such a leader? Part 1. Let's look at how good leaders lead their teams to achieve their goals. Suppose you are a leader, or you have friends around you who are leaders, you may often hear such complaints. I have a complete work process. Why are my employees not working efficiently? I have a perfect business vision. Why is the morale of my employees low? Why can't my employees handle everything according to my will, and every time a problem arises, I have to solve it myself? This is a problem that every leader may encounter. So why do you have such complaints? What are the reasons behind these problems? Kaplan says in his book, it's because you don't communicate to your employees what your company's vision is, that is, they don't know what the company's goals are and what makes it special. That's why good leaders start by clearly describing the company's vision to their employees when they lead their teams to achieve their goals. So what is a vision? Martin Luther King's most famous speech, I Have a Dream, is a good example. In this speech, Martin Luther King clearly outlined his vision, such as I dream that one day, on the red hillocks of Georgia, the sons of former slaves will be able to sit at the same table as the sons of former slave owners and be as close as brothers. I dreamed that one day my 4 children would live in a country where they would be judged not by the shade of their skin, but by the merit of their character, etc. These clear and concrete descriptions were the vision. At the time, Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech attracted countless followers and spurred change in the American civil rights movement. And in a sense, it illustrates the power of vision to inspire people. If a company wants to go from good to great, the most important step is to set forth the ultimate pursuit beyond profit, and this ultimate pursuit is the vision. Alibaba's vision is to make the world's business more difficult. Huawei's vision is to enrich human communication and life, and McKinsey & Company's vision is to help outstanding companies and governments be more successful. All of these companies have been driven by grand visions and have grown in size to where they are today. Since vision is so important, how do you frame it? Kaplan has helped many large companies do this kind of coaching, and his approach is to first sit down with all the members of the board of directors and executives, and he asks questions for these people to write down the answers. These questions include: what is your reason for working for this company? What do you want this company to be like in 10 or 20 years? What are the characteristics of this company? How would you describe to your children why you have worked for this company for 30 years, etc.? The purpose of asking these questions is to help board members and executives find their motivation to work hard at this company and feel their value in this company. If you try to do this, you will find that when everyone writes out the answers to the questions, most of the answers are different, which is why many companies have problems and conflicts. Because each of us has a different source of fulfillment, and if we don't make such a unification, the whole company will not have a common direction. That's when you need to find some vision templates and work with the executives of your company to define a common vision. While vision is important, it's not enough to have a vision. Good leaders also need to set key tasks for themselves. We all know that leaders have a lot going on, and many things need to be delegated or determined by the leader. If a leader does everything himself, this is bound to consume too much energy. According to the law of 28, 80% of profits are generated by 20% of the business, so it is more important for leaders to focus their time and energy on the important 20% of the business that brings high profits. So making key tasks means that you need to list 3 to 5 vital things that are the things that create 80% of the profits. If you list a dozen things out when you list your key tasks, that means you don't have key tasks. That way you'll find you're easily pulled over and pulled through when you're doing things, and it's hard to get things moving forward. So you have to make some trade-offs and determine which 3 things or 5 things are the most important things in the month. And the basis for the development of key tasks is your previously proposed vision. If you want to achieve the vision, which key tasks are necessary to do well, which only need to do just right, learn to give their key tasks graded, so that you can not only use the limited energy to the most important things, but also save a lot of time, not to get caught up in a variety of events, and consume too much energy and time, and do so can also increase your efficiency. Now that you have your vision and your key tasks, all that is left to do is to keep instilling the vision in your employees and organize their work according to the key tasks, working together to keep moving toward the goal. Part 2. Okay, so now you know that good leaders set a vision and specific key tasks to get everyone working in the same direction when leading their teams to achieve their goals. But even then, you may find that some employees don't do what you want them to do, and it's possible that some may choose to leave. In this sense, the ability to make subordinates loyal followers and create a positive and efficient operating team is a must for a good leader. So how can leaders win loyal followers for themselves? That's what we're going to talk about today in Part 2. In this part, we will tell you the 2 methods mentioned in Kaplan's book, which can effectively motivate employees and create an efficient running team, so that employees can follow you to accomplish the set goals. These 2 methods are, respectively, using coaching management, making succession planning, and timely delegation. Let's talk about coaching management first. By coaching management, we mean to identify the strengths and weaknesses of 2 to 3 employees, and help them improve their weaknesses, strengthen their strengths with exercises, action steps, and follow-up activities. You may say that we do this at the end of each year, and our company also adopts a 360-degree evaluation and feedback system. But Kaplan's coaching system is not the same as the evaluation and feedback system we usually understand. Kaplan's coaching system requires leaders to give timely feedback according to the situation of employees, instead of waiting until the year-end evaluation, to directly tell employees where you are not doing well and where you need to improve. Timely feedback means that the leader is required to observe the performance of employees at any time and give feedback to the employees in response to their performance. This is a bit like the various quizzes we took in school, where the teacher analyzes which points the students have not mastered based on the results of each student's quiz, and how different students have mastered them, and gives feedback to the students based on the results, such as which points need to be emphasized again. The teacher can't finish the semester without any tests and then give feedback after the final exam, when it's already too late. The same is true in business. If you wait until the end of the year to evaluate your employees, it is actually difficult for them to accept any constructive feedback and take any activities that can improve the current situation in their mindset. Because at the end of the year, employees know that the scores of these evaluations are related to their salary, benefits, and promotion prospects, and in their eyes, this is a time of year-end verdict. Therefore, it is crucial to give timely feedback in normal times, which will not only make them feel that their leaders value them, but also allow employees to discover their value and thus gain more satisfaction and sense of accomplishment. How can we establish a coaching system and create a coaching environment in a company? The author mentions that each leader can find 2 to 3 coaching targets for himself and set a goal. What do you want to coach them into? Then take out time to have a conversation every few days to help them set up specific goals for progress in these months. Help them do this well and watch them improve. Then each leader himself or herself should find a coach to talk to him or herself, to coach himself or herself, to ask himself or herself questions, to help him or her grow, and this is coaching-based management. Therefore, leaders need to give feedback to employees and get feedback from others in order to make continuous progress. After talking about coaching management, let's look at the second method, making succession planning and timely delegation. What is succession planning? You need to lock the candidate of your current position, and then consciously train him so that he is capable of taking up your current position. When it comes to this succession planning, you may think that it is too difficult, because many leaders, after sitting in the management position of the company, often find it hard to give up their current job and position and subconsciously believe that if they develop a talented subordinate will pose a threat to their own position. It's a bit like what we say, teach the disciple, starve the master. But in fact, if you can cultivate a competent subordinate, not only the ability of the subordinate to improve, your own ability will also improve, because teaching is the best learning. You will learn from the body of the subordinate than you teach out more, and this time your performance will progress, your performance will also improve, and your position will be more solid as a result. So when it comes to training candidates, you don't need to tell them explicitly, you just need to work out a succession plan and gradually increase the responsibility for them, so that the candidate's contribution to the company is likely to increase significantly and they will be more willing to give full play to their strengths. Also, from the candidate's point of view, they will feel that you are a good leader, because you fully believe in them and appoint many heavy responsibilities to them, and also let them play to their strengths, and they will naturally be willing to follow you all the time. So if you realize that your biggest responsibility is to get the job done through others, then you can realize that your biggest responsibility is to develop them, empower them and help them grow. Therefore, places like Bailey, and the residents of the candidates who entered the capital for the Imperial Examinations, often lived next to each other, and such places, where a large number of young students gathered, slowly developed into a social occasion. So, it can be said that the openness, the flirtatiousness and the youthful energy of the Tang Dynasty culture were greatly contributed by the flowery streets and lanes like Bailey. When it comes to the Imperial Examination, this is the most dominant talent selection system in China since the Sui and Tang dynasties. Before the Imperial Examinations, a person's upward mobility in society depended largely on his or her social standing, that is, his or her origin, but the Imperial Examinations did not ask for origin and gave people from the lower classes a chance to enter the upper echelons of society. In our first 2 books, we have repeatedly mentioned the gentry, that is, the extended family, which was an integral part of China's political landscape from the Qin and Han dynasties to the northern and southern dynasties, but after the Tang dynasty, the extended family still existed, but became politically insignificant. Many books explain that this is because the elites from non-higher families squeezed out the position of the sons of large families through the imperial examinations, leading to the decline of large families. This view is both correct and incorrect. Why is it wrong? Because only 10% of the officials in the Tang dynasty were selected through the imperial examinations, and it was not the case that the bottom elites eliminated the sons of the big families through the imperial examinations. Why is it right again? It is because the decline of the great families is indeed related to the imperial examination system. The specific logic is this: the opening of the imperial examination, first of all, is convenient for the sons of the big family. They are not all we imagine that kind of dude. A study test on the dumb, in fact, really said the test than the results. The children of the poor family is very difficult to pass them, because they have better economic conditions, access to more excellent educational resources, so the imperial examination this way actually, or the children of the big family to take advantage of. So what did the imperial examinations test? As we said in our last book, the main criterion for intellectuals from the Wei and Jin dynasties was the ability to write, and this criterion was even greater in the Sui and Tang dynasties, when the imperial examinations in the Tang dynasty started with 3 types of examinations: Confucian classics, literary writing, and current affairs commentary. But slowly, the proportion of literary writing became heavier and heavier, so that aspiring candidates devoted their efforts to poetry and literature. A very popular phenomenon in the examination hall at that time was called line scrolls, which meant that candidates tried to find a way to send their best poetry and literature to the examiner before the examination in order to get a good impression, and if you wrote a good poem, you were likely to get extra points. So the intellectuals in the Tang dynasty were very biased and generally had little ability to deal with specific matters. After they got their grades, they could only enter the central government and get official positions. So these candidates from big families had weaker and weaker relations with the local community, and had to rely on the imperial court. So, when the central government of the Tang dynasty finally fell, these intellectuals, who could not live without the court, and the big families they came from, also went down with them. One more interesting detail here is that Huang Chao, who finally dealt the fatal blow to the Tang dynasty, was a student who failed in the imperial examinations, and his most famous poem is, "When the autumn comes on the 8th day of the 9th month, after my flowers bloom, 100 flowers are killed. The fragrant array of the sky penetrates Chang'an, and the city is full of golden armor." The name of the poem is "After failing to pass the imperial examinations, you will be given chrysanthemums, isn't it?" It means that you did not win the imperial examination. Although the Huang Chao uprising was suppressed, the blow to the Tang dynasty was fatal, and Zhu Wen, who later put an end to the Tang dynasty and established the later Liang, was also once a subordinate of Huang Chao. This is where history makes future generations lament, right? Above we have talked about several major changes in Chinese history since the Tang dynasty, especially the Ansha rebellion, in terms of political system, civic life, and social structure, all of which were internal to China. But like the title of this book, A Universal Empire, its focus is not only limited to China's domestic, but also to the external world. We said earlier that the base of the Tang dynasty was in the northwest, so the main direction of their expansion, necessarily, was also placed in the northwest. And who were the Tang dynasty's neighbors in both directions? To the north, there was the powerful Turkic Empire, whose sphere of influence extended from today's northeast China to Central Asia, and was divided into Eastern Turkic and Western Turkic, with today's Xinjiang Altai Mountains as the boundary. To the west, there was the Western region, which is today's Xinjiang and part of Central Asia. The Chinese government controlled the western region during the Western Han Dynasty, but later lost actual control from the late Eastern Han Dynasty, and the region was scattered with small city-states with desert oases as their strongholds. which were basically subservient to the Western Turkic peoples. The Turks, from the northern and southern dynasties, were the biggest threat to the Chinese regime. Shortly after Li Shimin launched the Zhuan-Wumen rebellion, the Turks took advantage of the chaos to force their way into the vicinity of Chang'an, and Li had to bribe them to withdraw their troops. So he kept building up his strength to deal with the Turk. Soon, in the third year of Zhengwen, 629 AD, the Tang army attacked the Eastern Turkic Empire and destroyed the Eastern Turkic Khanate a year later. Then the Tang dynasty proceeded to operate the western region, conquered many small city-states, established the Anxi prefecture there, and restored the central authority to the western region. Later, in the era of Li Shimin's son, Gaozong Li Ji, the Tang dynasty defeated the Western Turkic Empire again, and the Anxi prefecture was at its peak, with influence as far as Persia, the border of Iran today, which is the farthest westward extension of China's territory in history. However, Li Shimin was different from the previous Qin emperors and Han emperors, in that he did not just want to open up the frontiers and drive out or destroy the enemies, but the Li Tang dynasty had nomadic influences in its lineage and culture. He did not attach much importance to the theory that the Han people were concerned with the distinction between Chinese and foreigners, that is, the boundaries of Han and minority identity. Starting from him, many important civil servants and military generals in the history of the Tang dynasty came from ethnic minorities, and some rituals and ceremonies also incorporated elements of ethnic minorities, not only because he applied them according to their talents, but also because Li Shimin had a higher international vision, which, in the words of the author of this book, meant that Li Shimin wanted to build a binary empire between the agrarian and nomadic worlds. So Li Shimin was the emperor and the son of heaven to the Han subjects of the Tang dynasty, and likewise the heavenly Khan to the nomads in the north, an identity that was also recognized by the grassland peoples after the fall of the Eastern Turkic peoples. So what Li Shimin sought was to bring the so-called Chinese and barbarians into the country he established, or the international system. So the author's position of Tang was that it was a worldwide empire. Although there was a revival of the Eastern Turkic Empire later on, the Tang dynasty was basically able to maintain this situation until the time of Emperor Xuanzong of Tang, and the situation changed, also due to the Ansha rebellion. While the Tang dynasty unified China, there was a great power in West Asia that rose almost simultaneously, the Arabian Empire. They expanded from the Arabian Peninsula to the three continents of Asia, Africa and Europe, and in the east, they were very close to the sphere of influence of the Ansha capital. Shortly before the outbreak of the Ansha rebellion, the two sides fought a battle in Tarnos, a place in today's Kazakhstan, and the Tang dynasty army lost. This defeat was not a big deal, but following the Ansha rebellion, the Tang dynasty had no energy to take care of the western region. At the same time, another powerful rival, Tubo, a minority regime on the Qinghai Tibet Plateau today, also began to expand its power and occupied the western corridor, separating the Anxi prefecture from the Tang dynasty's mainland. In the north, on the Mongolian plateau, Huihe, also an ethnic minority, rose on the former Turkic territory. The imperial vision of the Li Shimin era was not maintained. However, although the political territory was shrunk, China had another gain, namely, an East Asian system was born with Chinese characters and Chinese culture as the link. The so-called East Asian system was the adoption of Chinese political system, culture, values and writing, as well as similar customs and traditions, by a number of countries in and around China's frontier regions that were agrarian rather than nomadic, and that nominally recognized China as their boss, including Japan, Silla, Nanzhao, and northern Vietnam, which was part of China at the time, but later separated from it. Together with China, these countries formed a cultural system in which China was the core country, the equivalent of a star, and they were the equivalent of some small satellites. So you can see that today there are still many Chinese characters in Japanese, and in Korea, South Korea, and Vietnam, before modern times, their official script was also Chinese characters, and this is the soft power of culture. The Tang dynasty could not control these countries and regions politically, but Chinese culture conquered them and brought them into the Chinese cultural circle. Later, after the decline of Buddhism in India, China replaced India as the center and holy land of Buddhism, which also had a great influence on these countries. There was also the fact that the traditional land-based Silk Road was blocked by the Tubo and Huihe in the west, leaving Chinese merchants to seek new trade routes by sea. In the south, Panyu and Jiaoshu became important trading towns, and merchant ships from India and West Asia traveled to and from these places, creating the so-called Maritime Silk Road, which connected the China-centered East Asian system to the larger global system, and from this time on, China was part of the entire world trade and cultural exchange. So in this sense, China of the Tang Dynasty was a truly global empire. Finally, since we are talking about the Tang Dynasty, there is another topic that cannot be left untouched, which is the literature of the Tang Dynasty. The most accomplished literary genre of the Tang Dynasty was undoubtedly Tang poetry. Why did poetry reach its peak in the Tang Dynasty? In the author's opinion, it was because Tang poetry broke away from the cliché of court poetry during the Southern Dynasty. Although there were many poems related to court plots in the Tang Dynasty, there were also poems with border and garden themes, including many monumental works, to name but a few. In addition, the uses of poetry were freed from mere moral preaching and had more self-expression, a change that amounted to giving poetry a real liberation. Tang poetry was so brilliant that it often overshadowed other literary masterpieces of its contemporaries. In fact, what was truly revolutionary in the Tang Dynasty was the emergence of the Tang Sagas, which Lu Xun called the earliest novels consciously written by authors in China, and which were groundbreaking in terms of both genre and values. The author's explanation for the birth of the Tang Sagas is very original. He believes that, to a large extent, it was because the country's plight after the Ansha rebellion was so confusing that some excellent writers began to try to explore their own situation and future in the form of novels. Equally important was the rise of the ancient literature movement. The so-called ancient literature refers to the simple style of writing that existed before the Wei Jin and North-South dynasties, unlike the ekphrastic literature that was popular during the North-South dynasty, which was elaborate, formal and empty in content. The first two of the so-called eight masters of the Tang and Song dynasties, Han Yu and Liu Zongyuan, were the advocates of the ancient literature movement. The author also believes that the ancient literature movement should be seen in the context of social change. The spirit of Tang prose was mainly an advocacy of the ancient concept of imperial authority, which was also the result of intellectuals thinking about a series of problems arising from the decline of central authority after the Ansha rebellion and the conclusions they reached. Summing up, that's all we have for you in the third volume of Harvard History of China, the Tang Dynasty, so let's review it together. In this book, as an American sinologist, author Lu Weiyi focuses his attention on the Ansha rebellion. He argues that around the time of the Ansha rebellion, the political system, the social structure, the relationship between cultural life and the outside world, and even the literature of the Tang dynasty underwent great changes. In the early Tang dynasty, the era of Qian Khan was transformed into a cultural East Asian system centered on China, and the trade status of the Silk Road gave way to the Maritime Silk Road. In culture, poetry, legend, and prose all developed. The author argues that these changes indicate that Chinese history in the imperial era, from the medieval model, has begun to transition to a new model in the early modern period.